it's very much appreciated, and you're going to hear exactly the kinds of things that it's going for. So, so since this is just a few of us, let's make this interactive. Let's share thoughts that any of us have, questions that you have. I always come out of these learning something, you know, far more than I dish out. So we have that ability, especially tonight with the smaller crowd. It's funny, when I started talking about the incivility that we encounter in our world a few years ago, I would ask people to come up with a situation where they encountered some incivility. And when I first started this, you know, they'd have to think a ways back. And then in just a few short months and years, they were able to come up with several times during the last day that they had encountered it, especially if they had driven anywhere on the LA freeways, right? Well, now that we're not going anywhere, the kind of incivility we're seeing has really taken a major shift to where it's obviously a lot more online. And we talk in Masonry an awful lot about how things can be made instruments of great good or of greater evil, namely the master's gavel, if you will. And I have people condemning social media as it's the scourge of the earth. Well, it can be, but it's also a great tool. How many of you have connected with long lost relatives or friends or so on that, but for social media, you never would have seen them again? And so it's a question now of us having to relearn how to act properly in this kind of environment. And as I think too, when we eventually are able to get back together again, I think we're going to have to relearn that. You know, we all think that we're all just going to be able to come together and everything's going to work well and so on. But I mean, can you imagine if somebody hasn't had both doses of the vaccine by then and they're standoffish, they're not willing to give you the handshake or the hug, and we start to take offense to that. So we've got to constantly flow with the change of circumstances as we're talking about this. Somebody have a thought there?
Most worshipful, I get triggered when I'm out shopping or something like that, and people are flaunting not having their mask on. So I know what you're talking about, and I do everything I can not to say anything. Sometimes I'll say, "Oh, your mask slipped down" or something like that, but it's just something that, you know, kind of triggers me. But I hold myself so that I don't get angry.
And we're going to talk more about that because that's one way to handle it. But there's certain things that are so egregious, certain behavior that just shouldn't be tolerated. And I'm not saying that's an instance of it, but I could see times where it is, that it shouldn't be just shunned and bowled over in the interest of keeping peace. Welcome, brethren. We're glad you're able to join us. I went ahead and started, but we just started to get into this. This is a word cloud that I created a while back that just, I think, speaks of incivility. And there's a poet by the name of Haruki Murakami who said, "Always remember that to argue and win is to break down the reality of the person against whom you are arguing. It is painful to lose your reality, so be kind, even if you are right." Any thoughts on how that strikes you?
Worshipful, on my own opinion, like, if it's not worth it to argue with, I'm not gonna go down to that level.
And that's kind of what Andy was just talking about.
Most worshipful, for me, one of the things that really resonates with me is it kind of goes hand in hand with persuasion and rhetoric when you're trying to convince somebody of something that is actually a good thing for you to be convincing them to change their opinion on. For example, a light and funny example would be trying to trick your kids into enjoying eating vegetables, and you know it's a good cause, and you know that being tricky and persuasive with them is going to result in a good outcome, but you have to remember that your audience is going to be in a sensitive position when you are changing the reality of their perception and their experience. And so I think that this is a very interesting quote, because I can very much agree with that and see why it's important for you to realize that you need to be sensitive when you're trying to change somebody's opinion or experience on something.
A great perspective and a great take on it. You know, where we get ourselves in trouble, I think, is when we draw that line in the sand and we're just so certain that we're right about something that we can't back away from it. And if you think about it, in this world, there are actually relatively few absolute truths. Okay, it's a truth that the sun will rise in the east and set in the west. But is it, as an example, an absolute truth that winter is during December and January? Is that an absolute truth?
Not in Australia.
Bingo. Bingo. So it's your perspective. And all too often we get ourselves into trouble when we state something in the form of an absolute truth. And I'll, at the risk of offending anybody here, put religion into that category. My take on religion is that it's a deeply held belief, and it's so deeply held that it becomes your truth. But that doesn't mean it's a universal or absolute truth. And in fact, I think religion and the beliefs of religion is something that none of us are ever going to know until the appropriate time, and if even then. So we need to look at this from how it gets back to the golden rule, if you will, to a degree. How would we want to be treated if we later discovered we were wrong about something? And we certainly wouldn't want to be shamed about it. So we need to be graceful, give that person the grace to be wrong without being humiliated about it. And Freemasonry, as we know, is all about seeking enlightenment. And it's what I term this as is going from the dark to the light, and then getting to the point, the next level, which is true enlightenment. And I think we can use the Masonic ideals to restore civility in society. I often have people ask me, well, you know, why should the Masons be doing this? There are hundreds of other groups out there all trying to restore civility in society. And I think we are just uniquely qualified to do it for reasons as we'll be talking about shortly. But the short answer is, if we don't, then who will? There are other organizations trying to do this, but they're coming at it from different angles. We don't do this in the name of Masonry. We do it simply because it's the right thing. We don't need the credit. We don't need to get the pat on the back. We do it just because we're that concerned about improving the world in which we live. So we started this effort almost exactly 7 years ago. It'll be 7 years ago, the middle of February, when I presented to the Conference of Grand Masters of North America in Baltimore that the world about us was becoming increasingly uncivil. And if left unchecked, it might become a world that we're not willing to leave to our children and our grandchildren. I have to tell you that I didn't envision back in 2014 how bad it could get. And in the meantime, there's been so many times when I thought, gosh, my efforts and my time and my money could be better put to other uses. Maybe I should hang up this effort. And then I'll get a phone call or an email from somebody who will tell me that something that I shared with them back a few years ago helped them to deal with a particular situation. And that's what keeps me going. And my hope here tonight is that in the course of our conversation, you uncover at least 3 things that you think you can take and put into effect in your daily life. Any thoughts as to why I'm recommending you find 3 things? Besides, it's a very Masonic number. Any thoughts? We have found that 3 is about as much as we can focus on. If you try to do more than that, have you ever gone to these conferences where you take pages and pages of notes that you want to implement, and then you come back and it's so overwhelming you don't implement anything? If you just find 3 things that you're going to put to use, chances are you will manage to do so. So as I mentioned, a group of us started forming. We have met every month since then, like clockwork. When we first started meeting, we thought we ought to start by defining the word civility. Thought that was a natural place to start. And between us, we came up with all kinds of definitions, and they were feeling good, but not right. And we kept going back and massaging it, and it was just not working. And then I finally did what I should have done at the outset, which was Googled it. I typed in a Wikipedia, the font of all knowledge, the word civility, and it said, see incivility. And I have to tell you, it was one of those aha moments. It was easier to describe what civility is not than what it is. Well, no wonder we were having such a horrible time trying to describe it. There is now a definition of civility in Wikipedia, and I encourage you to go check it out. And it is the definition that we put into it. If any of you know Worshipful Brandon Lippincott from Conejo Valley Lodge up the road a bit from you, he did the lion's work on it. And if you've ever tried to submit anything to Wikipedia, it is incredibly frustrating. They just keep rejecting and rejecting, I think, hoping you eventually go away. Well, he kept at it with like a dog with a bone. And as I say, that definition is the one we put there. Of course, it's been edited a lot over the years, but if you look, you're going to see reference to Freemasonry throughout it. I've had a lot of people tell me that civility is simply about being polite, being nice, if you will, applying the rules of etiquette and avoiding talking about difficult subjects. I've had other folks tell me it has nothing to do with that. Civility is having a basic level of dignity and respect for other folks so that you can engage in the difficult conversations. Well, I think it's a combination of those things. It isn't simply about avoiding tough conversations. In fact, to say this a slightly different way, we don't need civility when things are going well, do we? We need civility when we hit those rough spots, when we're starting to go at it, when we're not seeing eye to eye on things. I've also had people tell me that civility is merely cyclical. And if we simply wait it out, the world will become more civil. And that may well be right. I don't know, but I have 2 major concerns with it. The first is, I don't know what would be wrong with us shortening that negative cycle. If we can get to a better place sooner, isn't that a wise thing to do? And then my other concern is, what if they're wrong? What if this incivility has become so much a part of our moral fabric that we're not able to reverse it? In fact, think about what our children learn. Do our children learn from what we tell them or from what they witness? A combination of both, of course, but what they witness has far more bearing on them than any words that ever come out of our mouth. If you want evidence of this, if you have a 15 or 16-year-old new driver in your house and you've been telling them what for ages, don't ever text and drive. But the minute you get in the car with them and they see you on your phone texting while you're driving, all the admonition you've given them doesn't do any good. It's out the window because what they saw you do is going to override it all. So I think civility is, I don't think you can have a civil conversation with somebody when you don't have any respect for them. You have to have that basic level of respect for somebody to engage in them. I'll give you a quick example of this. Most of you know Most Worshipful Dave Perry, Grand Master following me. And he had occasion to talk to the then Grand Master of Georgia, the Grand Master who had banned gay members from being Masons. And according to Most Worshipful Dave, that Georgian Grand Master told him that he will never be caught sitting in lodge with a black man. And David handled it the way I think I probably would have handled it. You know, my respect for you is out the window. I'm not going to engage with that kind of bigot. I'm certainly not going to change his attitude, and nothing productive is going to come out of this. So that's what I mean by you have to have that basic level of respect for somebody before you can engage them, even if you strongly disagree with them. How does that set with you, fellas? I mean, Andy, you were talking about the person in the grocery store that's not masked. Do you engage or not?
Well, I mean, I basically, what I try to do is I keep my distance, first of all. But there are occasions when I will say something. And it's generally, sometimes when I see a family, like you said, and they're all not wearing masks because dad's not wearing a mask. And so I have been known to say, not trying to start anything, but, you know, they're seeing what you do.
And how you say it matters. I mean, if you come at them with, you know, the fangs showing and so on, that certainly isn't going to be productive and could end up being quite dangerous. But if you can find a decent way to say it, and, you know, I'd appreciate it, or if you happen to forget your mask, I have another one here in my pocket, something like that. And it may not be well received, but at least you're not escalating it as if you came at them with both barrels blazing. Other thoughts? So I asked, please.
Oh, sorry, Most Worshipful. I find that it's very challenging to, especially in, you know, the times that we're in now, it's very difficult to control your own actions and decisions when you see something that sits so unpleasantly with you, and it goes against everything that you stand for, you know, within, you know, deep within yourself and your morals. It's become, you know, nowadays I feel like it's become so normalized to have these sorts of encounters with people. I have them with people in my office building frequently, where on a day-to-day basis, you're running into people that refuse to wear masks. And if you or if somebody else calls them on it and says, hey, you really should be wearing a mask, you know, there's a very repeating theme of, don't tell me what to do. You know, I can make my own decisions, from people in that example in particular. So anyway, I always do my best to communicate with people respectfully, and if I'm not sure that I'm capable of doing it, then I choose not to communicate with them. But I find that nowadays it's incredible how frequently me and my family members and friends and other people that I know are having these confrontations with people on a day-to-day basis. And so it's just an observation that I wanted to share, that I think a lot of people can relate to in the current time frame that we're in right now, because it's happening with such frequency now that it's expected and it's not surprising anymore.
And I think this is the manifestation of what has been there all along. It's just now really focused, hyper-focused on a particular issue. In my naivete, probably, you know, last April, maybe even still in March, I was shocked at how quickly this had become politicized. The pandemic had become politicized. You know, and I thought back to post 9/11 and the stories that you hear and read about World War II, about how we came together. And, you know, in World War II especially, people were giving up their lucrative jobs to serve in the military, or to work in factories and so on. We all pulled together for a common cause. And, you know, I and maybe you are as well, are wondering, do we have that ability in this country anymore? And there's lots of reasons for it. But again, I think we as Masons can help to be the glue to pull it back together. So let's give it that best shot. I think it is time for the Masonic family to make a difference. And I want you to notice how I have that worded. It's not just the Blue Lodges, it's the entire Masonic family. And this is a message that is resonating across the Masonic family, including with our young people. Sometimes I'll talk about the various working tools and what they say about civility. And I think if you think about the plum or the square or the level or the trowel and so on, we can all draw analogies as to what it says about civility. But tonight in particular, I want to talk about our 4 cardinal virtues and basic tenets. Brotherly love. I think it's obvious what that says about civility. Relieving another brother or another human being who's who's down and needs some help, that hand up. Speaks to treating people with dignity and respect. Truth, we've talked about that already. We've talked about temperance already, about how we will help to keep the peace by monitoring our own behaviors and reactions. Fortitude. You heard me talk just a moment ago about having the fortitude to continue with this effort and not get discouraged or waylaid because it seems so overwhelming. Prudence, deciding what is appropriate or not. And then justice. I think the more we are treating people in a just manner, we are treating them civilly. And so if you take just these 4 cardinal virtues and 3 principal tenets, every one of them speaks to civility. Andy, I think, was actually there when I met with the Rainbow Girls, and so many of them had heard my presentation. I said, let's shake this up, gals. And we sat around the tables in the dining room, and we talked about the 7 stations of the bow. And they were able to tie each of those to civility, just as I have here with our Masonic values. I've done that with Job's daughters, and then I've done it with D. Malay. And we're, come on. Oh, why is this not advancing on me? Bear with me just a moment. But if we talk about there we go. We talk about the D. Malay precepts, okay? Some of you are more familiar than others, but filial love for your family, kind of like we have the brotherly love. Reverence for sacred things, and I have the young men talk about that, and they tie that directly into civility. Courtesy is an obvious tie. Comradeship, fidelity, cleanness of thought and mind, keeping yourself pure in that way, and patriotism. They were able to tie every one of these to civility. And so what that has done in my mind is just evidence that we're all rowing the canoe in the same direction. If you can find one common word that exemplifies every one of our orders, it is this single word. And I don't think that's an accident. I think the founders of our respective organizations all had this objective in mind. And so now it's up to us to carry on that legacy. So the question is, we know the problems here. And why isn't my computer cooperating? Okay. Can we fix it? And if so, how do we go about fixing it? Well, yes, I'm convinced we can fix it, that it's not too late. When we first started this effort, we teamed up with the National Civility Center. And the National Civility Center, one of the things that we did right away was we built a civility toolkit. So if you can picture that Snap-on or Craftsman's tool chest that you have in the garage or in the shed. And if you're going to rebuild the carburetor, if you rebuild carburetors anymore, if you're going to work on something in the house, you can open the drawer that has the tools for that kind of job. And then you're going to pull out that tool that you need for that particular job. Same kind of thing with the Civility Toolbox. So if you go to civilitycenter.org under resources, you'll see that there, and there are some great resources, whether you're talking about restoring civility in your home life, in your workplace, dare I say in your lodge, or in your community. There's well over 1,000 tools there, and many of those tools have come from us. Our Masonic Center for Youth and Families has submitted several tools there for incivility in the home. So do check that out. You know, we all talk about how diversity is a good thing. And before I go into how diversity works, who has a definition of of diversity? What does diversity mean to you? Any thoughts? Obviously, it's our ethnic backgrounds. What else?
Equal respect.
I would, if I was going to offer something, I would definitely talk about being respectful and open-minded, so that you're earning your right to sit at the table and give your point of view and to talk about something by allowing everybody else that same kindness and that opportunity. And I also think that having having representation of all perspectives of whatever the particular topic or cause is, I think that giving everybody that is within that community or whatever it is, the ability to have their perspective seen and understood and presented, I think that's very important with diversity.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So what I think I heard from you emphasizing there, Chris, is diversity of thought and opinion and creating space for it.
Yes, very much so.
Absolutely. And so we tend to think of diversity as just the ethnic composition, but diversity as to backgrounds, as to genders, as to ages, as to the thought and opinion. That is what makes for good decisions. That is what makes for a healthy and enjoyable lifestyle. But just putting a bunch of different folks together and say, okay, now go make it work, won't work. For obvious reasons, I think. And so to be able to really benefit from diversity, we need to go through these phases. And I don't think you can skip them. The first is you need to seek to understand why somebody is different than you. And notice I used the word seek there. You need to be proactive about this. You can't just stand back and expect somebody to come and share all that's important to them and all about them. Another way to say this is you need to be curious. One of my careers is that of a financial planner. And I tell folks I basically get paid to be nosy. I get to talk to people about their deepest dreams and desires, about what kind of lifestyle they want to live, what kind of hopes they have, how they want to get their children educated, and so on. I get to live vicariously through their careers and what they're genuinely that sponge. I'm curious about other people. Once we get to that point, then we can begin to accept one another for our differences. And that acceptance can be considered to be a tolerance. Okay, I know you're different than me, and I'll put up with it. And maybe that's getting from darkness to light, but to me, that's not true enlightenment. And we're not reaching that true enlightenment until we get to the point where we appreciate one another for those differences. That's when we can take each other's talents and abilities and desires and skills and put it all together into something really beautiful. Now, a lot of us are doing a lot of walking these days. And let's say you're out on the street, and after the winds of the last few days, I should probably use a different example, but you see a piece of broken tile or glass on the sidewalk, although you may be seeing that with the winds. What are you likely to do with that? You're either going to kick it off to the side or pick it up and throw it away because it's dangerous, it's of no use. Well, I'll suggest to you that each of us is that broken shard. By itself, it has its capabilities and its degree of beauty, but it's not until we put it all together into a mosaic that we're creating something really unique, really special. For those of you that have had the privilege of being up at our Grand Lodge building in San Francisco, the first thing you see when you walk into that lobby is this tremendous endomosaic. And whether it's this lit up from the sun coming in the mornings or it's backlit at night, it is just spectacular. If you go up close to it, you're going to see it's made up of a bunch of broken glass and tile and even dirt and seeds and grass, things that you wouldn't even notice on the sidewalk, much less bend over and pick up. So this, to me, is really indicative of how diversity works in society. Pardon me. We need to go that extra mile to figure out how to fit people in to create something better than we can do on our individual basis. That making some sense?
Yeah, I think that's a very nice and interesting way to look at it, because it doesn't pretend like the challenge is going to be easy. It doesn't oversimplify it, and it really speaks to the facts of the matter, which is that diversity and being open-minded, it's not easy at all. And I think that there are a lot of really good examples nowadays that we're seeing that we could instantly jump up and say are totally emblematic of that point. It's not easy to be open-minded to somebody that you vehemently are at opposed ends with, I think.
I think you're spot on. And since it is just us fellas on here, I'm going to take this a little further. If you think about it, all too often we, as the male figure, have to be the provider and the strong support and have all the answers all the time. And that's a lot of pressure that society has put on us, we put on ourselves. And I'll tell you, when I first started learning about Masonry, I just didn't see why I needed to be in a fraternity, why I needed to be around guys. And it wasn't until I realized that I do need this. I do need that safe place with like-minded people where I can be vulnerable, where I can be myself, where I don't have to have all the answers all the time. And I realized in fairly short order, frankly, how important that is and how much I was missing that. And I think we need to be sure that we're creating that in our lodges. It's one time that we don't have to be machismo. And we need that in today's world. But I digress. Whenever I walk into a lodge, I look around at the various symbols and so on. And there's one symbol I look for in particular. In California, this is not required to be in our lodges, although other jurisdictions it is. And it, of course, is that point within the circle. That point is said to represent who? Us, the individual brother who is constantly trying to improve himself, to hone himself from that rough ashlar to the perfect ashlar, recognizing we'll never, of course, get there. And we know we have all these forces coming down on us that's trying to prevent us from being that kind of person we try to be. And by the way, we need to decide what kind of person we're going to be before the temptation arises, because that's not the time to decide. I mentioned I'm a financial planner. I can't decide when somebody is offering me, you know, $1 million to do something wrong, that I'm going to be an upright and ethical financial advisor. I need to decide that from day one. Just like a pilot doesn't get one free drunk flight. Okay? Just like you can't decide you're going to be faithful to your spouse when that temptation comes along. You have to decide that long before that. And we know that with all these pressures pushing down on us, it's hard. So we as Masons, of course, do some things to help us to build that integrity. And the first thing we're taught when we cross the threshold of the lodge is to take the compasses and circumscribe a circle around ourselves. And that creates a boundary beyond which we're not to allow our passions and our prejudices to begin to intrude upon the rights and enjoyment of other people. Now, if we were together in the lodge, I would actually be coming right up to somebody and getting in their face, and they would be backing off because I'd be making them physically uncomfortable. And that's an example of what this circle that we've surrounded ourselves with is designed to do. I need to have the awareness, the sensitivity of when my words, my actions, my behavior is starting to impact somebody in a negative way, and then back off. So back to Andy in the grocery store with the person not wearing the mask. You know, you can let them know, you can hand them a mask if you have it available. That's about as far as you're able to go. At that point, you're not able to push it any further other than to keep yourself safe and maintain that distance. This requires a self-awareness. We need to understand our behaviors, what we're in control of, and how they're impacting somebody else. And deliberately stop at the point where it's having that negative impact on somebody else. You know, we talked earlier about the anonymity of the keyboard on social media. I'm absolutely convinced that many people say things on social media that they would never, ever say to somebody face to face. That's where we need to draw that circle around ourselves. If we're upset with somebody and we've written that nasty email, hit save before you hit send. Come back tomorrow morning and see if you're going to send it at all, or if you are you going to edit it? Now, this symbol is nowhere near complete yet, is it? The next thing we notice is that it has these two parallel perpendicular lines, which are said to represent, of course, our patron saints of Masonry, St. John the Baptist and St. John the Evangelist. Well, to me, these lines also have another meaning. When I see this symbol, it conjures up the teachings of my Masonic mentors, the men who have helped to guide me into the kind of person I am today. Some of you may have heard this story, so I'll apologize ahead of time, but Worshipful Jack Joe of blessed memory, past master of my lodge, the night I become a Master Mason, I get seated in the junior steward's seat. That was my beginning through the line of officers. And I came home that night and Linda says, "So how was it?" I said, "Oh, it was great, really incredible. And guess what? I'm in the line." And she, being the daughter of a PGM, said, "Do you have any idea what that means?" And I said, "I have none." She says, "Well, I do, and you're in deep trouble." And boy, was she right. But from that night on, Worshipful Jack, at the end of every meeting, would come up next to me, put his arm around me, and proceed to tell me what I had done wrong. Fast forward to December 1996, 3.5 years later, my last meeting that I was presiding as Master of the Lodge. And I finally finally got it right. I didn't forget to do the pledge. I didn't forget to invite the masters and past masters to seats in the East. I nailed every bit of it. And I decided I was going to close lodge and get out of there before Jack could ruin it for me. So I gavel the lodge down, I remove my collar, I remove my apron, and I make a beeline for the door. Well, for an older guy, Jack was pretty quick, because about the time I hit the altar, he caught up to me, put his arm around me. And my arm was cocked. I was ready to give it to him right in the gut. How dare you rain on my parade? Fortunately, something caught me, and I realized what he was doing. He knew that my Masonic career was not over. He knew I had a whole lot more developing and growing to do. And here I was, I thought I was at the pinnacle of my career. I had nothing else to learn. I had a whole lot more to learn. And he was whispering that good counsel in my ear. He was gently admonishing me of my errors. Did anybody else know what Jack was telling me? Nah. For all they knew, he was complimenting me or saying, let's go get an iced tea after the meeting. You see, Jack had this positive habit of publicly praising me and others and privately admonishing me. And I think all too often we are afraid to mentor other people. Oh, we've got the jokes about the past masters, how they got everything down once that hat is removed and they're sitting on the sideline and they know it all. But I think we've gone away from truly mentoring our brethren. And there are two kinds of mentorships. There is the intentional mentorship, where typically somebody younger, would come up to you and ask you, Dennis, I really admire you and how you handle things. And it's probably in a career. Would you take me under your wings and show me how to do this? And you agree to meet with them regularly and show them the ropes. Then there's the informal, or what I call incidental mentorship, where you may not even realize that somebody is watching you and studying your every action. Those are the dangerous ones, of course. So are we, especially with our Masonic youth, demonstrating the kind of attitudes and the kind of behaviors that we would want them to emulate? Because as we talked about earlier, they are watching us. Let's not be afraid to be that mentor. Let's not be afraid to hold ourselves to higher standards, because that's what we want to be emulated. Now, we know the symbol's not yet finished, is it? We had the volume of the sacred law. And now with this, with our behavior necessarily touching the bounds of that circle and those outward pillars and the volume of the sacred law surmounting it all, now we cannot materially err. That's why I look for that symbol in every lodge I go into. It just says so much to me and encapsulates so much of the Masonic values and teachings. Any thoughts on this? I can't tell how many of you I put to sleep.
Pop quiz, everybody.
Oh,
Go ahead.
keeping my mic off just because I have it playing on my TV downstairs, and I don't want to cause any echoing for anybody. But I definitely like that. Sorry.
You okay, man?
I definitely appreciated that explanation there. And, I feel that not only, just in Masonry, but, in general, mentors are things that are all around, especially in business. But I guess I'm curious, have you seen any lodges implement any sort of formal, plans or strategies for mentorship?
I have. I've seen some lodges do it really, really well. And in fact, one of the things that I was suggesting when I was GM was, and it's especially true now with the pandemic, but you know, sometimes we're taking so long to get brothers advanced through the degrees, and that's not a bad thing. I mean, one of the things that Masonry teaches that the world needs more of is patience. You can't become a Mason quickly, and that's intentional. But while we have this brother waiting to get his entered apprentice degree or waiting to advance to fellowcraft or what have you, I suggested that lodges give that brother an older brother who we may not see around so much anymore, give him their phone number and have the younger brother contact the older one and just chat. And when we're able to, go to the house and visit. And I was getting reports back about how, you know, what was intended to be a 15, 30-minute visit turned into hours long. And both of the brothers appreciated it and grew. And mentorship isn't just from the more experienced and older down to, you know, the younger, less experienced person. Mentorship goes both ways. It keeps the mentor sharp as well as it gives the mentee greater knowledge. I've seen lodges where they have truly teamed up more experienced brethren with the newer brethren, and it works really well. We see it happen without calling that with our candidates coaches. I mean, how many of you have developed incredibly deep friendships with your candidates coach? I think most of us can say we have. You all certainly remember who he was. And that wasn't to teach you the ritual. That was to engage in those really productive, incredible conversations that you had. I mean, when you're working on your proficiency, think about how relative little time you probably spent on learning the words as you did just rapping. Does that answer your question, Wesley?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's definitely something that, you know, we as a leadership team can, you know, continue and, you know, think of how we can, you know, improve or implement, you know, the same sorts of strategies at our lodge over at San Fernando.
Absolutely. And the more intentional you are about it, it's going to pay huge dividends to you. You're going to have greater success in bringing the brother into the fold. The brothers that are doing the mentoring are going to feel more rewarded, and you're going to find that they're just accomplishing stuff that you've never dreamed of before. Absolutely. Now, so much of what I'm talking about doesn't require a major shift or change in who you are. It just requires some tweaking as to how we handle things, how we talk to one another, how we believe. And one of those examples is this. You've been in that situation where you've told somebody something and they say yes, and you feel that moment of elation. They agree with me. And then comes the comma, but. Well, yes, but. And think about what happens to you totally subconsciously in a fraction of a second. You're thinking, oh gosh, here it comes. They agreed with me for a moment. Now they're going to tell me everything that's wrong. And you get defensive. You put up your shell to protect yourself. By the way, that may not be what's coming, but you're not even able to hear it anymore because of that. And I think we can all think of an example where either somebody said that to us or we've said it to somebody else and how it makes us feel. So the very simple tweak is to change that but to an and. Yes, and did you think about this as well? Now what are you doing? You're building on the conversation. And isn't that what we are as Masons? We're builders. We're not there to tear people down. We're there to build them up. This one very subtle change will change how your conversations go. And if you're a parent or a grandparent, try it. I promise you it will change things. You'll actually physically see the young person's expression change. when you say yes and. Now we're working together. Now we're building on it, and it makes all the difference. I want to talk to you about what I call the 3 Ds. The first D is a debate. I think we all think we know what a debate is. By the way, what we saw in the presidential debates are not debates. Those are made for TV, reality TV, if you will. But a debate is where we take a position and we need to defend that position no matter what. It's a contest, isn't it? And when you have a contest, you have a winner. And when you have a winner, you necessarily have a loser. And there are certain rules that you must abide by in a debate, because if you violate them, you will almost certainly lose. And one of those rules is you can never, ever waver from your position. Because as soon as you do, your opponent's going to come in for the kill. Well, guess what, Louis? What you just said makes a whole lot of sense. I had never thought about that. But as soon as I say something like that, I've lost the debate. And I think we can see where there are times and places for debating. But the purpose of the debate is to identify a winner. The second D is a deliberation. Deliberation is where we have a problem, probably a complex problem, where the solutions are not immediately evident. And so what we're going to do is we're going to gather the right people into the discussion, the people that have the understanding, the experience, the education, the ability to address that problem. And the first thing they're probably going to do is determine what is the root of the problem. Because oftentimes what we see is just the tip of the iceberg, and it's not the real problem underneath the invisible root of the problem. Next thing they're likely to do is to brainstorm possible solutions and determine advantages and disadvantages to each of these solutions. And to the best of their ability, they're even going to try to anticipate what we call unintended consequences. An example of that is the CARES Act that Congress implemented last spring to address the pandemic. They wanted to encourage people to stay home. And so they were allowing them to get unemployment insurance plus an extra $600 a week. Well, some people were actually earning more that way than they were working. And so there was some thought after the curve had actually flattened, if you can remember those days, it seems like a long, long time ago. But there was some thought that that was creating a disincentive for people to return to work. Now, if Congress had legitimately thought about that as a potential unintended consequence, they might have written the bill in a different way. The purpose of the deliberation is what? To find solutions and to eventually reach a consensus as to the course of action the group is going to take. Think about what we do inside a lodge. Isn't that closest to a deliberation? We want to hear countervailing opinions. We want to have that discussion. We want to have it in a civil, respectful manner, but we give voice to everybody. Think about how we talk about meeting on the level. And what that means to me is that the newest entered apprentice has equal voice with the 50-year past master. We value those different perspectives. And in a deliberation, just like in our lodge, we aim to reach a consensus. Consensus doesn't mean that it's unanimous, but it does mean it's the decision the group has decided to move forward with. And when we walk out of here, we will speak with one voice, just as we ought to be doing in our lodges. The third D is dialogue. What is dialogue? Who wants to share with me what they think dialogue is?
Communication back and forth.
Communication back and forth. Now boil that down to an even lower common denominator. What is communication?
Talking and listening.
Talking
And listening.
and listening. It takes both sides of it. Otherwise, we don't have communication. If somebody didn't hear it, it wasn't communicated. A dialogue is merely about talking and being heard. Is it about winning like a debate? No. Is it about finding solutions as in a deliberation? No. Now, solutions may come, but that's not the purpose. Well, it's not about winning. If it's not about finding solutions, why in the world waste your time in dialogue? Any thoughts? Why would we want to engage in dialogue?
While you're listening, you could change your mind.
You might change your mind, but that's kind of like a debate where that's our objective there. And they said that's not the objective of the dialogue. We may change our minds, but that's not the purpose. I will say that we grow when we understand different perspectives. Other thoughts? Luis? How many times have you just wanted to shout to somebody, "You're not listening to me. Would you just hear me?" Sometimes we just need to be heard. So it's a two-way street. We need to be heard, and by listening and truly engaging in dialogue with others, we grow, we learn. Now, engaging in civil dialogue is really, really tough. It's not natural to us. In fact, there's an Institute of Civil Dialogue that was formed out of the Arizona State University Hugh Down School of Human Communication. The fact that there's a nonprofit institute just to cover civil dialogue gives you the state of affairs. And basically, it takes a difficult subject. I'll give you an example here. It would be appropriate for Freemasonry to sponsor a youth order that is open to people of all genders. And when you hear that, I hope some of you are thinking, well, yeah, it's about time that we need a youth order that is open to all genders and accepting of all genders and not just male or female. And there are others that are thinking, no, we need, in that time of a person's life, boys need to be around other boys and be able to grow and experiment and learn from each other that way. And same thing with girls. And there's other opportunities for them to be together. You know, when you hear this, you can get pretty riled up or other subjects on it. And so the idea behind civil dialogue is that we are able to have a conversation that isn't meant to change anybody's mind, but is meant to hear other people's perspectives and to be heard. And so after sharing this proposal and sharing some background on our youth orders, the history of them, how they're comprised and so on, a facilitator would then have 5 chairs set up in a horseshoe shape in the middle of the room and ask for folks to come and take one of these chairs, ranging from strongly agree to strongly disagree. Now, it's interesting, some of you have seen me do this with young people involved. And when they're young people, you know, I have to warn them, only 1 butt per seat and no running. The first one that's going to get there will be in that seat, but nobody else is going to get to take that seat. When I'm with adults, it takes somebody to break the ice to take the first seat. But once we get them filled, then we share the ground rules of civility. And I'm going to share this now. This works no matter what kind of scenario you're in. You don't have to be in a formal dialogue situation for this to work. Remember when we started, I asked you to find 3 nuggets of things that you might want to take out of it. And you might find 1 or 2 of those nuggets here. So first, please be passionate. As we talked about with the point within the circle, nothing worthwhile would be accomplished without passion in the world. But we need to do it without being hostile. And one of the ways we do that is by focusing on how the statement makes you feel. Instead of just reacting, take some time, think about how that statement makes you feel. Use truthful speech, but do it in a way that doesn't attack others. And one way we do that is we focus on making I statements. I think, I feel, I believe, instead of you statements. Think about the impact of this. Joey, well, you think, how do I know what Joey thinks or feels or believes? I don't. And if I say that, that's going to make him feel attacked and likely put him on the defense. Instead, the only truth I can speak of is from my own perspective. And just simply changing it from you, which is accusatory, to I, changes the entire conversation. I think, I feel, I believe. It's okay to disagree, but do it without demonizing the other person. Disagree with the idea. Disagree with the premise. You don't have to disagree with the person, who they are in and of themselves. Engage in active listening. And this is something that's really, really hard for me. It involves listening patiently. And that means not formulating your response while the other person is talking. And there's a risk to this. If you don't formulate your response while the other one is talking, you may well forget what you were going to say, which may not be that bad a thing. Maybe it wasn't all that important. But the reason we can't allow ourselves to start thinking about how we're going to respond is studies show the human mind can only truly focus on one thing at a time. We like to think we can multitask, but we simply are incapable of it. So by forcing ourselves to stay in the moment and truly listen, we're able to be focused and hear. Don't engage in that fake listening. Something else that's helpful is to reframe what you think you heard. And this accomplishes two things. One is it tells the other person that you're listening. Well, what I think I heard you say, Luis, is, Luis now knows that I heard him. But the other thing that it does is it gives the other person the chance to correct a misunderstanding you've had. How many times have we had that knockdown, drag-out argument, only to learn hours later or days later or years later that there was just a silly misunderstanding? And yet we jeopardized or maybe ruined that friendship over that misunderstanding. By using reframing, that gives this other party a chance to say, well, Russ, you're close. That's not exactly what I meant. And then they can clarify, avoiding that misunderstanding that may well have ruined our relationship. So I encourage you to try reframing. And this isn't just mimicking back what you heard, but truly interpreting what you think you heard and sharing it back. One of the other reasons that this works so well is that we have an information source in the audience on the side. This person has access to the internet through their phone, and the parties, the participants, the 5 participants agree that if any one of them states something as fact and somebody else disagrees or isn't sure of it, that line of conversation will stop until such time as that information source can determine whether it's true or not. And it's fascinating. Just the mere presence of that information source changes the conversation. People don't talk in terms of absolutes so much anymore. Considering that 68.7% of all statistics are made up on the spot. Sorry, that was a dad joke. It can get us in a lot of trouble when we state something as absolute fact versus just what we think, our opinion. Do you think you can put these rules to work in your various walks of life, in the home, at work, and so on?
I would say absolutely. The 2 snippets I took out of that already this entire evening is, the reframing, of course, as you were just talking about, and, just changing the focus away from from you to the I. I think that's hugely beneficial and something that I could see myself using. I also, just to throw it out there, because you what you were describing right now with the chairs is very similar. So you might find it interesting. There's a YouTube channel called Jubilee, and it's essentially the same sort of idea where they get people of diversity and put them all in the same room, and there's a big open floor with different lines with the strongly agree to strongly disagree. They ask a question to the group, and then they kind of separate themselves in that line. And then the YouTube channel, focuses in on individuals and let them, explain their reasoning or why they chose where they chose. And you'll often see people after hearing other perspectives move from one line to another, or, whether it's just one line or completely across the floor to the complete opposite side after they've, heard someone else's perspective. So.
Yeah, absolutely, Wes. And we do that here as well. At the end of it, the moderator, I'm sorry, the facilitator, not a moderator, will ask each participant what they thought of the experience. And secondly, if they could now take any position, would they change? And exactly how powerful it is when somebody that was strongly one side or the other says, you know what, I'd be over here now. Even though that wasn't the purpose wasn't to change anybody's mind. It shows that they were open-minded enough that they did. And back to, us being the men with all the answers and the providers and so on and so forth. If you think about it with our politicians, when they change their mind, what do we call them? A flip-flopper, right? A waffler. And that's the worst thing in the world. I think that's the best thing in the world. The times that I'm most proud of who I am is when I come into an argument, pretty sure I'm on the right side of it. But once I listen to the discussion, I realize I didn't have all the perspectives. I'm going to give you a quick analogy of this. First time I went to Grand Lodge, I was senior warden of my lodge, and I was carrying 3 of our 4 ballots for the lodge. And this is, they're paper ballots where you punch through them. And of course, in October before or September meeting, I guess, before annual communication, our lodge discussed all the resolutions. And I dutifully made notes as to how I should vote. I get my ballot cards, and because I want to do the right thing, I take out my pen and I punch the ballot cards based on how my lodge decided we should vote. Then what happens is the resolution gets addressed on the floor, and I start listening to the pro and con arguments, and I'm saying to myself, boy, we didn't consider that. We never thought of that aspect. And in 40% of the cases, I was convinced that I had voted opposite the way my lodge would have voted. What do I do now? I've just voted 3 ballots the wrong way. I can't go get new ones. So after thinking about it a while, what I did was I punched the opposite just to negate my vote, because I didn't want to vote the wrong way. And that right there was a very, very good evidence for why you shouldn't make up your mind until you've heard all that there is to hear about a subject. And I think we all snap to reaching judgments. I mean, everybody's supposed to have an opinion right away. It's okay to say, you know what, I don't have enough information. Or even, I'm not sure. Worshipful Sean, how am I doing on time?
Worshipful, yes.
Another 15 or 20, okay?
Yes, sir. Yes, most worshipful.
And I'm going to share something else with you that some of you may have seen, but I'm guessing most of you haven't. This is something that our Grand Lodge leadership put together several years ago. And it takes the 3 principal tenets of Freemasonry and the 4 cardinal virtues and puts them into Solomon's wheel. So brotherly love, relief and truth, temperance, fortitude, prudence, and justice. And you take some painter's tape or masking tape and make a spoke, a wheel, if you will, on the floor. And you put these words, phrases down in no particular order. It doesn't matter how they are. And I've done this with Masons only, and I've done this with Masons and non-Masons. And you get them all to come and literally stand in a slice of these pies. Now, 3 principal tenets for a cardinal virtues, that equals 7. To make this equal, you have an 8th slot, so we have a blank there. And that blank is whatever it needs to be for you at that time. It's able to morph, if you will. So you have the folks come and stand in a particular piece of pie. And you have them contemplate what that is saying to them at that time. And then you have them walk around and spend time in each of them, contemplating each of those pieces of pie. If you have a lot of people, make sure they're going the same direction like salmon, otherwise it gets really ugly. One of the things that's important here is you share with them that what happens in this room stays in this room, because people can actually get pretty emotional with this. And then you have them go to the particular wedge that is speaking to them the most right now. And when you have everybody where they need to be, then you ask them to act this out without using their words. Any idea why we want them doing it without using words? Any thoughts? It's more difficult, isn't it? And when we're doing things physically, tactily, it tends to sink it in a little more. You own it more, if you will, than if you just spouted the Webster's dictionary definition of it. And here's the next step of it. You now have them go into that particular piece of the pie that they would like to work on more. And once they're there, you ask for volunteers as to who would like to talk about why they chose that spot. And this is where it gets really emotional sometimes. And I have seen brothers come up to the others and apologize, make things right that had been broken for quite some time. I've seen all kinds of different emotions come here out of this. It's really a powerful, powerful tool. And how I use it now is when I'm facing a tough situation where the answer is not readily apparent to me, I will mentally walk Solomon's wheel. And I think there are times I'm probably spending 15 or 30 seconds at it. Other times I'm probably spending several minutes. It's kind of, if you will, a form of meditation for me. And after spending that time contemplating it in that way, usually the answer becomes pretty clear to me. Do you think this is something you might want to try in your lodges? It's really, really a neat exercise. All righty. What do you think of that logo, guys? This was developed by a brother out of British Columbia. When he presented it to me, it said it all. It's an incredible logo as far as I'm concerned. And we use this both inside the Masonic family and outside. This effort, as I talked about, started 7 years ago. A little over a year ago, we decided to put all of our efforts under one umbrella. And we formed the Worldwide Civility Council. That's a nonprofit organization. In fact, that's the organization that the officers of San Fernando Lodge recently contributed to. And again, I'm very grateful to you. And that became the umbrella to all of our efforts. First effort is the Urgency of Civility Conference coming up this May. It's going to be all virtual, May 18th and 19th. And you'll see more information about it. We'd encourage you to come and join us. Out of the last conference that we hosted in 2019 came this concept of certified civil. The idea here is that your organization, your lodge, your business, your social media could apply to be certified civil. And that means that you will abide by certain rules of civility with all that you come in contact. So if it's a business, your employees, your customers, or your clients, your suppliers, you're making that commitment to treat those folks with dignity and respect. And if you've done something that they think does not uphold those standards of civility, they can file what we're calling a civility concern. And here the idea is that the Worldwide Civility Council will work with you and say, you know, Sean, Dennis had this issue, and can we work it out? Can we learn from this? So the idea isn't to slap you over the wrist and say you blew it, but rather to try to bring about that reformation for everybody to learn from it. We developed the civility scorecard. The idea here is you can plug in somebody's speech and it will rate the relative level of civility in it. Again, to encourage people to speak in a more civil manner. We've also developed the civility shop where you can get stuff that has this logo on it. It's actually under some changes right now, but we'll get it back online here pretty soon. And as far as the Masonic Family Civility Project, all of this is available in one place, and that's at MasonicCivility.org. Many of you are Facebook friends with me. I know Facebook is very last year, but that's what my generation still uses. And you may have seen me on occasion post a pretty controversial statement. And I'll do that for a couple reasons. One is I truly want to learn what people on the opposite side of the discussion think about it. And I also want to demonstrate what I hope is civil behavior from me. And I've had a lot of people comment about how they're really surprised that I didn't take the bait or go off on an uncivil way. I will oftentimes come across conversations amongst Masons that I'm not proud of, that are extremely uncivil. And so to gently remind the brethren of their Masonic obligations, I'll type in #Masons for Civility, or DMLA for Civility, or whatever it is. And this is usually doing one of two things. It's either quieting the conversation down, or they're simply unfriending me and taking the conversation elsewhere. And frankly, I'm okay with either one of those outcomes. But I do find that it tends to be a not preachy way of me reminding them how they should be acting. All right, I've done a lot of talking so far. So I'd like to kind of summarize what we might be able to do. The first step is to examine our own behavior. The only person whose control you have over at all is your own. Let's always strive for higher levels of civility in all that we do. Go to MasonicCivility.org. You're going to find all kinds of resources there to use in your lodge, in your community. There are trestle board articles, there's videos, there's all kinds of tools. By the way, we've started a civility podcast and a civility YouTube channel. Go to your podcaster and just do Worldwide Civility, and you'll find our podcasts there. Look for opportunities to promote this concept inside your lodge, inside your youth orders, in your community. Look to become a civility ambassador. These are folks that we're putting together to help to spread the word and to share what they're learning, what works and what doesn't work. You can support the Masonic Civility Project with your charity, and also go to civilityshop.org. You can attend that Urgency of Civility conference, as I mentioned. If you go to urgencyofcivility.org, the details will be up there very shortly. One of the things that we are promoting is October 20th is a day without politics. Most of you know very worshipful Jack Rose, our grand lecturer who stepped down a couple years ago. But he and his son one time were talking, and like so many of us, it took no time for the conversation to devolve into politics. And his son Travis said, "Dad, can we just have one conversation without talking about politics?" And Jack said, "Oh yeah, what do you have in mind?" He says, "Well, let's just make it a whole day." And Jack said, "Okay, what day should that be?" And Travis said, "Well, my birthday is October 20th, so that's the date." And it's interesting. The first year we held it, it was actually during Grand Lodge, so it was a whole lot easier to observe it. The next year, it wasn't during Grand Lodge, and it was a lot harder. But it's interesting to go a day without talking politics. There's a group called Listen First Fridays that has every Friday some sessions, some thoughts on how to just make the world a better place. I want to share this with you. It's a sign of the times. Civility or else. Might as well say damn it underneath it. Incivility will just happen. Civility takes some effort. It takes us deciding what kind of people we want to be before we get into that contentious situation. It needs to become a part of our habit. We need to take that split moment and check ourselves before we simply respond and make sure we're responding in a way that we'll later be proud of. But each of us has the ability to make the change. Each of us is that stone that we need to allow to be dropped into the placid waters and allow the ripples to extend to the far shores, creating change and change for the better. We do this because we are Masons, not necessarily in the name of Masonry. If not us, who? If not now, when? Let us all do what we can to repair the world. I thank you very much for the time.
Thank you, most worshipful. That was
Thank you
great.
so much. Most beautiful.
My pleasure.
Most worshipful.
Yes, sir.
I think I heard you on one of the podcasts I was listening to. Do you do that on a regular basis, or was it just that one time?
No, we have a whole podcast channel. Unfortunately, most of them are of me, but we are recording others. So I encourage you to go through and check them out, and especially listen to the others. Since you've heard me, I don't have that much new to say from time to time. There is one that I am especially proud of, and that's where I interviewed the leaders, the jurisdictional leaders of Joe's Daughters, Rainbow for Girls, and D. Malay. And it ran a little long. It's about an hour, but I promise you it will be the best hour you invest. If you have any doubts that this next generation gets it, I promise you by the end of it, you will be taking the keys to the world out of your pocket and handing it over to this next generation right now, because these kids get it. So yeah, just in your podcast or go to Worldwide Civility and you'll find it there. Other thoughts, other questions? Y'all know how to reach me, so don't ever hesitate.
This is the best time.
I do the presentations for other groups besides Masonry. I've done them for Chambers of Commerce and Rotary and so on and so forth. I love doing them with the youth orders.
I would like to personally thank you for taking the time to speak with us all this evening. It was very insightful, and you know, having seen you a couple of years ago, I feel, you know, having a different perspective now, you know, changed the way that I perceive some of the things that you looked at, and I'm able to apply them in a different way. So I greatly appreciate you sharing that. And I've already subscribed to the podcast while we were talking, and
awesome.
Look forward to checking out some of those other tools. So
excellent. Was that Cesar?
No, Wesley.
Wesley.
Oh, okay. I couldn't see your box didn't light up, and I couldn't see your.
Oh, no worries.
Cool. I'm going to tell you one more quick story, if I may. Most of you know Most Worshipful John Cooper. He was the Grand Master before me, a world-renowned Masonic scholar. Just you can imagine the intimidation when I found out I was going to be following him up the Grand Lodge leadership line. But he and I were sitting in an apprentice degree once on the sidelines, and you know, John has personally conferred thousands of degrees. He's sat in, I don't know, thousands and thousands of degrees, but he elbows me, and I'm thinking, oh gosh, should I fall asleep or something? I'm hoping there's no drool, right? And he says, did you catch that? Did you catch that? And I said, yeah, it was, the officers delivered it, right? No. he says, I'll tell you when we get finished. And we go outside, and he shared something that had just struck him about that degree. Now, did the ritual change? Hopefully not, right? It's the same as had been delivered in number 1 as it was number 1000 that he had witnessed. But what had changed was his susceptibility to hearing it in a different way. And that's what you were just saying, Wesley, is, I heard this before, but now I'm open to hearing new things, different things out of it. So I appreciate that. And if we're not growing, folks, we are decaying. We're going backwards. So let's always stay in that state of growth. Other thoughts, questions?
Thank you very much, Most Worshipful, for your time. It's a good learning.
Amy, always good to see you. My pleasure.
Most Worshipful, I just wanted to also say thank you for your time today, and also just to offer my own personal experience. As like I said earlier, I've seen this particular presentation from you probably 3 or 4 times now. And I always am so happy after I sit through it again and realize that even though I recognize certain similar things that I heard from the last one, that the discussions between the groups of people are always different. And so that always strikes me as very genuine and very, very good for your own personal growth, because you are literally engaging in discussion and diversity and a lot of these things that we talk about during the presentation with new people every time. And because we're also at a different point in our lives, today than we were last year or 3 years ago, we have more experience to draw from. And so it's always a very genuinely fresh experience for me every time that I get to have the opportunity to see something like this with you. So I really appreciate it, and I just wanted to share that with everybody and with you.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.